where me and Gabe are going to chat about the tech sales industry, more so just a bit of a Q&A of based off questions that I'm getting over Instagram and LinkedIn and TikTok. And then we're just going to answer a few of those. But really, like I'm starting to post on Instagram around how I got into technology sales and then how we're sort of building wealth around that. And today is just a forum for us to be able to record some episodes where I can then send that episode on to folks so then they can learn a little bit more about the industry, and then we can go a little bit deeper with them one-on-one once they understand maybe where they would like to start or where their interest areas are. So my name is Kale Stanley, been in technology sales now for the past 5 years, but historically came from left school in year 11 to go do personal training and lifeguarding. And then I did a stint at the Penrith Panthers in a sales role there, and then pivoted into tech sales world. So Gabe, I'll hand it over to you for an introduction of you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kay. Super stoked to be here as a bit of a co-pilot for the journey. So thanks for having me, first and foremost. Keen to take people through sort of the journey where I started too. I think a big question at the moment that I'm hearing secondhand is like, what even is tech sales? And there's a lot to that. So would love to take a bit of a macro view, talk to the journey, share some insights about the industry and the pathway to really grow income, and what an amazing career and industry this is for people and how transformative it can be for people's lives, just like we've experienced too. So it's super exciting. I entered the tech sales and tech industry world a little differently to you, having already served 7 years in the Australian Army. So I came from a different industry, from a national security lens into a cybersecurity lens. And I work in the tech industry in cyber. And I took a bit of a different route, having started my tech sales journey from a channel perspective within a software distributor, and then made the leap over into the vendor. And this jargon we can break down to as we describe a little bit more, and have been working in the tech industry for the last 7 years. So can you share a little bit more?
I love that. And I think why both of us have really cool insights into the industry is because I came in at 22 years old, started a really junior role and sort of followed that natural sales progression pathway. And you've come in actually 5 years older than me, but had a lot more experience in life, very senior roles in the army. And you sort of came into the role, I would say, in a very high sort of experienced role, but doing not direct sales like me, which will break down again, but you're actually building a business. So within sort of a company. So I'm really excited to share those two areas of how we both got into tech sales. And we'll again break down that jargon, because I know when I overheard Gabe first get into it, it sounded like she was just talking ABC, NTT, all this acronyms. And it is very confusing when you first hear it all, but it starts to make a little bit more sense as we go along and explain a little bit of this as well.
We're going to do an acronym guide as well, Kay. That would be a cool resource for people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The names in how companies call themselves and partners and channels and vendors, it's just really unique names, and it's really fun and energetic space to be in when it comes to names and acronyms as well.
Super cool. Where should we start? What do you think would be most valuable for the audience? Is it defining what is tech sales, or is it talking to the journey, how you started? Where do you think we should start, Kay?
First one is, what is tech sales? And then I think we should start with how did you find, so what is tech sales? How did you even find the industry tech sales? And what led you into there? Because I think it all started with you sort of taking that leap of faith first. Then we actually met each other. COVID hit for me, and then I overheard you sort of working in the industry, and then I made the pivot as well. So how about I'll let you answer what is tech sales, and then how you also got into the channel.
Yeah, cool. Well, I would define tech sales as a role and a career where you're fundamentally representing a company and you're selling technology or software services to other companies in a B2B fashion. The internal view of that, as I just described it, is very much doing that to achieve a revenue outcome on behalf of the company that you're employed by. But I would say that the external view in tech sales is all about the customer and how you're helping them to solve problems to achieve certain outcomes for their business too. And you typically would be interacting with different sort of stakeholders. Could be someone like a chief information officer, because we're in the technology, the software world. But you also typically in the enterprise sales fashion are interacting with multiple different business owners, lines of business. And that could also include functional areas such as the CFO, chief financial officer, or the CMO, chief marketing officer, or other types of stakeholders, if it is really a complex sort of multi-threaded enterprise motion, of which, of course, Kay, no better than you, someone like you to talk about. And then even a second level of detail behind that are things like, are you in the enterprise motion, or are you actually, is your ICP, your ideal customer profile, a little bit more mid-market or commercial or SMB, which is also
Yeah.
another whole gamut of jargon and ball game to define.
Yeah. And so I'll take my slant to this too and just go a little more layman's terms again to really bring this back to folks like what is technology sales? I would say we all know, I hope we all know ChatGPT right now. We all know Canva. So one, I would say they're very much more consumer driven technologies that we would know them by. So ChatGPT, obviously using that to be able to summarize and find information, in Canva, that's a design tool. But essentially what those two things are software. And so technology sales is we are selling software, and this word SaaS is software as a service. And that is what we are selling. And back to your point too, Gabe, is when me being in a technology sales role, and we can break down a lot of these titles, which can be my title is like an account executive for enterprise. When it comes to this, very much to what you just mentioned around enterprise sales, or is it like a B2B or B2C? And I remember when you told me two things is like every company needs software to run their business. And that was just like a big unlock for me of like, oh, okay, this is an important industry to get into. It was so as simple as that. And the other one around selling, I think a lot of people get afraid of that classic like car salesman ship role with the word sales. And I really don't think it is like that in the enterprise sales world, because you are really having to be strategic, work with like the Woolworths, Coles, ANZ banks, to be able to understand what problem and solution they're trying to solve with how does that drive more revenue, increase their annual spend, but then also being able to decrease potentially full-time employees or not having to grow at the same rate, but scale double the size as well. And software is a lever for them and folks to be able to pull on to be more productive in the workforce. So it's actually a really cool space to be in, because one, sales as well is really important to, I think, anything that you do in life, to be able to articulate yourself better, to be able to understand problems, create a solution for that. And then really it helps you be able to build a business, understand business cases, numbers, and how that ties to that problem as well.
Nice, Kay. And what about, just before we jump into a bit more about the journey and some of the insights, why would you say tech sales is a great career? Why is it so compelling for people today?
Yeah, great question. Why is tech sales so appealing to jump into today? I think, if I reflect back on my time at Pen of Panthers, like I started selling memberships, and then I went into selling sponsorships. And two things is it can be very capped, because it's like only folks that follow Pen of Panthers, one, purchase that. And two, it's very like in-person type of event that you have to sell for people to come to. And that's events, right? Why it's cool to go into the tech space and sell software, it's global, right? And these, A200 companies. So when I say A200, they're all like the 200 biggest companies in Australia. And all these large organizations are making billions of dollars a year, and they need software to be able to operate and run their business. So the potential of earning in that space is really interesting. And I think in my certain role is that I'm actually working for a US company that's come to Australia, and to be able to see the global presence of how the tech industry is actually shaping up every region. And I help look after the Asia, Pacific, Japan region. So the cultural benefits of being able to experience is a really cool facet to getting into technology sales as well.
Awesome. Love it. I think it's a really rewarding career. Tech's the future. It forces you to learn, try new things, expands your horizon, really tests you out what you're capable of. And also, we can go into this later, but there's also a lot of like tangential roles to sales. We're focusing on the sales element, but it's really a great place to start if you are driven, have certain characteristics. And I think the big kicker is if you're interested in making lots of money, more money, it can be an amazing vehicle to do so.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk about, it's obviously a sales role. So, some people in the comments have written like, of course, like year on year, it's going to change in terms of what you make. Yes, of course, that is right. you always have a base and you have like earning potentials of what you do if you hit your quota. But once you earn over a percentage of like potentially what your commission structure is, you can make a lot of money. And I think what's really important to highlight when we jump into what vendor should you choose to go work for, I've chosen a very startup scale up organization that is looking to IPO. And if you can get equity in that business and you're driving towards this mission to IPO, you can make a lot of money that way too, as well. And Gabe, I think back to your point, I think what I'd love you to share when you talk about why you got into technology sales, you definitely have this intellectual, very driven passion towards how technology shapes humanity. And I'm a bit more shallower, probably when it was just focused on money and revenue. But I think to your point, technology really is making a huge impact to humanity. And that is a really big driver for why you got into it as well.
Totally. Well, everyone's motivations are different, right? And we're all different. So know thyself, got to work out what's interesting to you, what's motivating for you. And we all have different reasons. And probably two good examples of differing motivations, interest areas, drivers, but we can have a fulfilling career still by the same token.
Absolutely. I think one thing before we jump into, because I think my point is like, you don't have to be super passionate. Like the whole reason I got into this is because I want to like create a fulfilling life for myself. This was a path that I seen. Someone told me that they made $700,000 in 1 year. It was the first time I heard someone say that they had earned that much money. And so I was like, okay, maybe this is an industry I can get into. I didn't need any qualifications. And therefore I took that leap of faith to be able to learn the industry and be able to sort of work my career up. And I've got a long way to go. But certainly on that path where I could see making that much money in 1 year. So yeah.
Awesome. You've got a few questions coming inbound from some of the recent stuff you've been doing. We've got guides to share, stories to tell. What do you think the most valuable thing to do now is, Kay? What would you like to share next?
Yep. So I think you should start with just slightly of how you even found next gen, because I think that's sort of where you started. Or there's a few other roles in that sense. So actually, maybe you talk through your story, and then I can pivot into mine, and then we can go over this slide pack that we put together.
Awesome. So my journey into tech sales was, my first career was in the army, and this whole thing of how I got into the army, which we could go to into another story. But there was a point in my army career where I was either continue going down the path of being an army officer and all the rest, but I started to get really curious about business and technology because I had a driver of wanting to also earn more money than what I saw was capped in the army, though the mission was very, very inspiring. And so I just had this inflection point of thinking about what else would be out there. What are the unknown unknowns at the moment? I need to go and figure out sort of the bigger view as to what I can make of my life. And I was very driven to do so. And then I just started to talk to the people around me from the army and people that I'd met. I'm a good networker, lots of relationships, very people driven. And I just asked around and said, what do you think of this? And I very quickly found myself reconnecting with someone from the Royal Military College Duntrin, who had actually started a company to help veterans or people in the military transition out of the military and come into tech roles, which I was really inspired by that because there was some support network and a community of people also helping to do something similar to what we're doing now, which is to sort of give the education around what tech sales even is, what the tech industry is, and to help upskill into a bit more of a digital ready environment for a career. And I think that was really remarkable in the way that those guys did that. So I connected and then I sort of went through their pathway and got connected into the tech industry in Australia. And I landed a role out of the army in SAP, which is a really big multinational tech company known for enterprise resource planning software. And they've branched into other different functional areas as well. And I went into SAP as an account executive for my first role out of army, did that for a year. And then I connected with John Walters, who was the founder CEO of a software distribution company. He was actually specifically looking for an ex-army officer to come and start a new business within his company for cybersecurity. And I connected with him through the network and was hired there to really build out from 0 to 1 the cybersecurity practice for them, which gave me, over a span of 3 years at that company, direct visibility into the cybersecurity technology landscape, both globally and across the region. because our mandate was really to help companies from overseas achieve market expansion down under and across the Asia Pacific region. And I got to learn pretty quickly all the ecosystem for the different inner workings of the whole end-to-end process, and start working with an amazing part of the technology domain, which is cybersecurity, where I work now. And then made a jump after 3 years to come into Palo Alto Networks, where I've been working for 3 years in a similar sort of business role. All of those roles being sales, business development, business management related. So staying core to sort of the tech sales umbrella across the 3 different companies, and then sort of led me to where I am today.
Yeah. So I have 2 questions to follow up on there. 2 key points to highlight is Gabe left the army and started as an account executive. Were you looking after like enterprise, mid-market? What was like your territory and patch in that role?
Yeah, my territory was commercial. So
Yep.
segment was for like the 2,000 to the 5,000 headcount, more mid-market in terms of that customer segmentation. And I was specifically charged with companies in Victoria and WA.
Yeah. So I want to highlight that there because it's like Gabe left the army and got into that role. And my path, I had to even start like, almost like 2 layers below that to, I was just hitting phones, taking calls to try and book meetings for someone like Gabe to then run the sales process and close deals. And I think when we talk about like mid-market enterprise, strategic account executives, it all really is so different in each vendor, because it's depending if you are like a startup company that has 500 employees versus like a Microsoft that has hundreds of thousands of employees and they're selling to organizations that have 600,000 folks, and your software can handle that. And that comes back to our whole topic before around like enterprise selling mid-market, like B2C, B2B as well. So we'll break down that in our slides a little bit more as well. Gabe, I think one other question I had for you is like, there's no doubt that sales is hard. And a lot of folks that we want to help get into potentially technology sales, it's also going to be like a quite challenging, like transformation going into a new role, new industry and things like that. Can you talk to maybe some of the hardships that you had when you pivoted from the army?
Yeah, totally. The hardships and the failures are like great to talk about because we all experience them and not all bulletproof. And I had many stumbles. I'm a hand on hot stove sort of learner, so what not to do and plenty of failures that come with that. The big thing for me coming out of army into the account executive role, the sales role within SAP, that first year was a big culture shock for me. And I was pretty underwhelmed and almost disenfranchised with the role, the industry, the decision. So I was like, holy shit, what have I done? So that was a big eye opener. Thankfully, it was just like sort of person I am is, master of your own destiny. And I was able to pivot into that role at NextGen, where I had a lot more of a culture fit for myself personally. And so that was a really big upside, and it put me on the journey that I am today. So that was awesome. So definitely the culture shock and kind of a stumble in that sense. I think the other thing with sort of where where it's not so glamorous is like it is sales is not an easy role. And so you have to be prepared to build that resilience behind the day-to-day actions. And I think the intention of what you're building is very much how do you set people up for success and almost have them with that expectation of what they're going into and some of the resources and the pro tips almost as to like what you can prepare yourself for in a role like that. So yeah, no, it's like all the stuff that comes with it, which is like understanding that your responsibility is that revenue goal and that's the quota, but there's lots of upside that comes with that too. There's lots of people that don't want to talk to you. I remember sitting down with one of the SDRs at SAP one time in the Melbourne office, and we were just like, let's just do a big blitz morning and just start cold calling people. And it's just like, they don't answer, they don't answer, they don't answer. Someone answers, they don't want to talk to you. It's just like sort of eating shit for a little while. But if you're prepared to sort of get into the groove and fail fast, as they say, you can also use those to really come into a positive.
Yep. Like a few really key parts is like, it's all about like volume, but it's all about getting more strategic, how you're reaching out to folks. And then I think, SDR is one thing. So sales development rep, and then like actually being an account executive and being in control of closing like the deal ranges that I work with can be anywhere from like $100,000 to $1 million. So like to close those deals, it's very strategic. People aren't just going to sign over that. So there's like sales cycles can be months long for folks to sign contracts. So it's actually, you have to have a lot of patience, a lot of determination, And I think one thing that I really want to help folks with is like that longevity piece in sales, because it is high stress. And, folks only really last maybe a couple years before they want to give up potentially. And the other thing is that's really important is like, you definitely got to have that. What we talk a lot about, Gabe, is like having a lot of safety in the organization, great leaders around you. You want leaders that have also done it, been there, so they can help you and be better. And I'm really fortunate to be in that situation. And I think lastly for me is like I feel like sales is not like the destination that I want. I don't want to be like an account executive for the rest of my life. But what I can see is what it can set myself up to do in the next 7 to 10 years on the money that I'm making to potentially go and do something else. But again, the skills and acquisitions of what I'm getting at the moment, it's very translatable into whatever you want to do in the future.
Love it. And interestingly, Kay, time now is 2025, the year 2025. When I was at SAP was the start of 2018. And in fact, we met at the end of 2018. So how about a little bit about your journey and how you got into tech sales?
Yep. So basically had been fired from Panthers and then we were like the whole story there is like, I was devastated. I didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. I was kind of wanting to go back to personal training. I actually took like this very interim job at O Media, which was like a operational role. And it was like the first job I got out of like applying for many. So we could basically move to the city. And so we could both work out of the city. And that would just be more affordable and more easier from a drive and commute perspective. Long story short, COVID hit and basically we all got sent to go work from home. And that was such a blessing because two things that I was able, because we had just met too, like, and you were talking about you working in technology sales, it wasn't really registering for me a lot of the work that you were doing. And then when I was able to sit next to you and we were plonked next to each other and overhearing meetings and trying to work, I just had this big brain dump of basically what you were exposed to, what you were working on. But the big factor for me was like the energy that people bring in technology sales. I think it's a very high agency. People want to get shit done. Like it's not like people are faking to work. Like I felt like I was sitting there and just staring at the clock, pretending to do work, waiting to like clock off. And like it was so boring and I could just feel that total energy that you did not have that experience. So like that was like the biggest unlock for me of like why I wanted to get into the industry. And so I was really fortunate that, you had some connections when you just got into, and I started to like apply for as many roles as I possibly could. And what we'll get into now in the slides in a moment here is like sort of like tier one, tier two, tier three vendors and things like that, because it is quite hard to go work for a really big name brand like an Atlassian straight away if you don't have any technology skills or just like experience. But I was fortunate enough to be introduced to someone that we both know now, and they were able to give me some guidance and help me sort of find a role and a job in their organization. So, I went through the process of the about 6 or 7 things where I had to pitch to them the company and etc. But what did help me, it's really important to highlight, like I was able to leverage that I was in a sales role previously at Penrith Panthers. And so I was able to get a very junior role in this company because it was just hitting dials, calling folks to try and book meetings. So that was sort of my pivot into getting into an organization called Splunk that's actually just been acquired by Cisco. And they're actually a very large organization. And I actually recommend if you can get into quite a large organization to get started with, when you first get into it, it's important because they've got all the training framework set up for you to be able to succeed. I think if I had started in a real startup, I don't know if I would have understood the industry and landscape as quickly as I did.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Dan. I similarly had that experience from people in the know, which was like, they always spoke about the logo on the resume will take you far. And that was the case with SAP coming out of Army. So I think that went a long way. I think also that person that you mentioned, like a big thing for me is like the networking and the people like we're here also to help people and give our insights to the industry and connect. And people do, when you're a great person, people will put you forward for the referral like you had in that first experience, or you stay in touch with these people, you learn from them. And it's also like, don't be afraid to ask for help or their insights or just catch up for that coffee because it does go a long way.
Absolutely. And I think, we were discussing what are some great roles or folks like with previous experience that really like shine in these companies. Like I do think it's like if you've played sport, things like that, it just shows like that you can do the repetitive stuff for quite a long time, the grit. I think, folks like physios, personal trainers, and things like this that showed that they've been in the game, they can study and they can sort of rock up and do like the work. I think these are great characteristics when you pivot into tech.
I agree. And people hear tech sometimes and they're a bit daunted, like, oh, I don't have tech skills, like technology skills. I'm not a developer, I'm not an engineer, but it's like, well, you have to take a step back and realize like the realm of software technology, its application to businesses and companies today, everything is digitized. Like we use social media apps. Everyone's using ChatGPT or like at the moment, it's just the same sort of thing in terms of like a career path personally, but digitization is everywhere for companies today have to operate, like you said earlier. So it's like the realm of tech sales is like you don't actually have to be technical or even engineering minded. It's more about knowing yourself and the skills and the strengths that you bring, and then being able to apply that and learn the skills on the job, but having those fundamental sort of human first soft skills to get that. And that's that relationship back to if you are previously an athlete or you have these other career experiences, or even if you're younger and starting out, it's more about how can you learn the skills and what sort of resilience and soft skills do you bring to the role, sort of in any domain of life, really, but specifically in a tech sales career.
That is so important to highlight that you do not need to be technical to get into technology sales, because I am so far from that in terms of like even wanting to understand how to code. And it's just that is not what we are doing. When you are selling software, you definitely have a technical counterpart that knows all that stuff. But your main focus, the one that is not technical, is to, go and research. If you're going to go sell to Woolworths, for example, go and research like in the news, what they're trying to achieve as a business, like what is the CEO setting as a strategic vision, and how can that tie to the business case that your software could potentially help them with. So that is a really great shout to highlight that.
Nice, Jay. Yeah. It's definitely about how do you problem solve? How do you be a trusted partner? The relationships, how do you achieve your customer to get the outcome that they're looking for? Their needs, their requirements, and working backwards onto how your solution can help them with that, and being along the journey with them. So there's a lot more to say in terms of the non-technical skills is what you need.
Yeah. And I think I do say that you don't need to be like super technical. I think as you go, like every year, you start to understand the technology layer and stacks a lot more. Like when I first came in, obviously had no clue. Like even the cloud, like, when people talked about the cloud, it was just still so foreign to me how even that worked. And it's not that I even understand it now, but there's certainly like niches to what you can sell, whether it be AI, cyber, data, cloud, and infra. So there's all these different pieces to technology that you can learn more about. And I think what you've done really well, Gabe, and it's important to highlight. It, I like listening to a lot of podcasts around like just technology, though I don't understand the depths of like how the technology is built. I'm understanding the business problem and how it's impacting that organization. So it is important though, once you get into it, you start learning about it, read articles, listen to podcasts. And I think, Gabe, you do a really good job of um, being technical enough with how it does operate though, but that does come with some time and how you also learn, whether it's like visual reading and things like that as well.
Totally. Love it.
All right. Well, that's sort of how we got into technology sales. And, I think one important piece is that you're always continuously learning. Every time you go to a new vendor, there's new technology to learn and whatnot. So the main takeaways though, don't be afraid to jump in, get started. Organizations have enablement, boot camps. They teach you how to sell. And at the end of the day, everyone in the technology space is definitely looking for folks to come in from different backgrounds because it brings a unique space. I didn't know that this world was even around when I was in high school or anything like that. So people are trying to make that more aware. And yeah, you'll have a lot of fun when you get into it. But Gabe, if you want to pivot and bring up the slides, we can talk a little bit more technically about the industry and the career path.
Let's do it.
All right. Did you want to go back a slide first to kick us off with the industry? Do you want to take us through
Yeah.
this slightly, Gabe?
Full on pitch, the whole kit and caboodle. First thing is people can download this resource, which is super cool. So if you're attach the link to this recording as well, Kay. But we've put
Yep.
together 4 or 5 slides for people just as an industry overview, as well as some career pathways and what we see. I thought it was important on the framing. I always love to understand more of the strategic landscape, a bit of the macro view, understand my operating environment. And so 2 things on this slide, which is something that you articulated before, Kay. You're a big proponent of target the vendor first for the tech sales role. What is a vendor? A vendor is someone that is is responsible as the creator of the software. So this comes from a lot of innovation, and innovation is usually a big combustion of people's ideas and seeing the world in a different view or different vision for the future. And that typically now translates into software. AI is all the rave today. I'm coming from a cybersecurity background as well, but as you even mentioned earlier, there's also cloud data. There's other sort of business applications around ERP or HR software. There's accounting software, and we can name heaps of them. But we thought on the left side here, just as a view in terms of where we're coming from, there's a lot of innovation coming out of Silicon Valley in the US. It's known as the world's #1 innovation hub. It's got a lot of resources, capital investment, network effects, people, great engineers, and they're developing a lot of new solutions because they see the world in a different way. What typically happens is then they look at market expansion across the world. Typically that's broken up into 3 main theaters: North America, the Middle East, the European region, and then also the Asia Pac and down under here in Australia. As 3 main parts. So typically if it's more startup, Kay, which you can talk to from a startup lens, whether you're working for in AI at the moment, that's going to look different. If you're a really early stage or you're a newer company, AI is a great example of that, given it's a newer technology, not that new, but a lot more in the main eye at the moment, versus a company like the one I'm working for at the moment, who is publicly listed. We're sort of 15 years old. We have $10 billion in revenue every year, and we're a big multinational firm with thousands and thousands and thousands of people. But the same framing typically applies in terms of the global footprint and different types of tier 1, 2, 3 vendors. And then you've got a big ecosystem around that too, that just shows some of the key innovation hubs as well coming across the world.
That's great recap. Before we move on to the next slide, how about I just pitch the diagram with the pretty pictures? But I think this is, I wanted this part in there because it is important to highlight, our technology is where it's at today. And Gabe's written like the years here, but, the chip started, which was in 1940s there. And then we had, I can't really see the numbers there, Gabe, but how many billion of population?
Yeah, so the sort of timeline, I think if you think about today in 2025, we've got like 8.5 billion people in the world. But if we look back on big technology waves, that second pretty picture there, Kay, from the left, talks to the 1990s, which there was only a 5 billion person population globally, and only 1% of the population was online on the internet. And it talks to also the big booms in digitization, which brings us forward to today with even more bigger numbers.
And the coolest stat that we were just chatting about before. So there's 8 billion people in the world today. 70% are online, and it's taken different technologies time to get even like hundreds of million folks adoption on a certain platform, whether that be Meta. And if you think about Meta, that's like Instagram, Facebook, and things like that. But OpenAI, which is ChatGPT's product, they are having 700 million, and actually I think it's 1 billion users per week on their platform. Like the rapid rate of how technology is getting equally distributed, which we still have a long way to go. But the fact that 1 billion people a week are using this software, this technology, is incredible to me.
Yeah, it's a good point, Kay. And we should probably would love to create a graph on that. I think OpenAI is a good example with the ChatGPT explosion, talking to Gen AI and a lot consumer app. They're moving into the B2B space as well, and they're continuing to innovate and develop services on top of their platform. Another really good, relatable example would be Canva. Canva started in the consumer space as well, but have moved to enterprise. And I know even the same sort of thing. If you think about OpenAI reaching 1 billion users every week today, same thing for Canva. They've got like, I don't actually know what the numbers are, but I know Mel Perkins is the CEO founder. She very much said, she wants like 1 in 3 people using Canva around the world. And it's like, by the time they get there, we'll have 10 billion people in the world. And it's like, could you imagine most of the population using Canva? Just like it shows that exponential effect of how technology is available all the time and it can reach a global population. And I think both of those vendors, those two solution providers, those two applications are really good examples as to how technology is both ubiquitous, but hooks to the point as to why tech sales and backing the right vendor, choosing the right career for the right employer can also be really rewarding with that future growth prospect as well.
Yeah. Great. Love it. All
Awesome.
right. Let's
Get
jump
into
in a little bit. The fun stuff.
the fun stuff.
Let's go. No, I think we put this together really, I think, to pass on sort of our journey we've been on. This is based on also like what's out there in the industry at the moment around what could your career path be. And we would dig more into like what are other roles in technology sales, so that you don't just have to be in sales. There's like marketing, there's customer success, there's the channel, there's so many other roles. But purely here, you can see sort of like an entry level role starting at that $70,000 to $120,000 a year. Sort of what that would essentially look like would be like starting on a base. And usually SDR roles, BDR roles, these are basically doing a lot of inbound and outbound calling. People have a lot of webinars in vendors. And so essentially what you're doing there is calling up those folks that attended the webinars, registered, didn't come. And really you are just doing like a market scan on who would be interested, looking at the folks' titles, which is like your ICP, and who would you be going after to try and book a meeting with for the account executives. Now, usually the split, what I've seen when you first get into a role is like a 70-30 split or 60-40 split. So it's like you have a base, let's say you have 60K as a base and then 40K potential earnings if you hit 100% of your commission structure. That does not, so if you hit 100%, you will get that total $40,000. But if you hit 200%, usually there's kickers in place and you could then go and earn an additional 80, 100, whatever the amount could be. So it really is usually uncapped. And I think a really important thing to highlight when you get into technology sales and you're going through the interview process is you want to ensure that it is an uncapped commission structure, because you don't want to hit your quota and then not being able to actually go and earn more money. So I think that's a really important piece to ask during that. And I think another really important key tip when you are going for job interviews as a sales development representative or business development representative is one, is uncapped commission, but two, show me other SDRs that have been promoted into account executive roles. How many folks in the past 2 years have you promoted up into that role? Because it's really important to highlight you're going into an organization that is hiring within and they see the potential to build you up to want to promote you as well. That's sort of your entry level roles. I think me and Gabe were discussing you want to be in those roles for 2 years max. I think I got promoted basically within like a year to go into that next role, but it can take some time. So I think when you first get started, definitely it's all about, again, back to your company IPO. Do they lay off a lot of people? Are they hiring fast? And so it's all very dependent on which vendor you go into. But I think at the 2-year mark, if you're not getting promoted, I would actually be looking for another vendor role to go and start out as like a mid-market account executive to go start selling some software. So you really want to make that leap into the mid-level as soon as possible. But I do think it's really important to get that level of groundwork done. If you are probably that age between like 20 to 25, I think it's a great place to start, even like 28, 29, 30. Because I think actually a lot of folks, even that are like 25 to 30, could be earning 60K a year, 80K, and you could actually go and land a job that's the same amount of money that you are earning annually. The reason why I do think it's important to start there, because if you don't know how to prospect and build pipeline, you are going to struggle as an account executive, because that is, if you have pipeline that you can close, it's like a really important factor to have. And actually what's important too, because I actually see a lot of older folks now that are like 40, 50, and they don't want to learn these new AI tools. And that's okay, because they might be a little bit more like get a deal done over at the pub. But I do think it's important to learn these new AI skills and technology that's out there to be able to go and prospect. And you're able to do that as an SDR.
The other big thing too, Kay, is the skills you learn as an SDR, they follow you for the rest of your career. And so what we've done here is put a full guide together, which you could see happen over 12, 15, 20 years, right? And there's a lot here, but it is intended to be a guide. But the SDR role, what would you say are the key skills to an SDR role, and how do they relate to the AE, to the sales manager, to the VP, to the CEO? What
The
some great
core
starting
skills,
points.
yeah, like even if you just like if I go right to the end, and if you say there's a VP of sales, or let's say they're plonking the first person into Australia and they're in a US company and they're hiring a country manager to look after all these sales folks that you see on the page, they're probably going to be the first person on ground. And at the end of the day, they're going to have to do the exact same thing as the sales development representative is doing, is reach out to people they know to book meetings to try and close the deals. If you start your own business, there's no one else out there going to call the folks for you. So like the fundamental things that you overcome is like fear of rejection, calling people, doing something sort of repetitive, but it is like a numbers game. So it's just like as much energy that you put in, as most calls, volumes, and being strategic about that, the more output you're going to get to help drive the business forward as well.
Love
And
it.
fundamentally, I don't think organizations can last without sales development representatives. And there's this whole big debate out there in the market at the moment, which we won't get into. But fundamentally, they're nurturing a lot of the folks that maybe don't want to purchase right now, but they're keeping tabs on them, sending them really good information that the organization's doing that to keep them up to date with the latest news, latest events, and just keeping them warm. So when they're ready to purchase, they can help them go through that cycle as well.
And what if I'm new to the tech industry? I've heard you speak, I've read your article, I'm pretty keen to get an SDR role. How hard is it? What advice would you have for me? What should I start thinking about to land this sort of role with this sort of income, with the prospect of growing further a year after that?
Yeah, how would you get into a sales development representative role in technology sales if you have never been in there before? I think it's very dependent on what your past skills are and your age. Like I do have to say that. So I'll give a few things of like what I recommend to get into the role, but then I think it could be a bit dependent on each person. I think for myself, I was selling memberships at Pen of Panthers, so I could play to that I've done sales, and really they're just looking for those translatable skills, which then helped me land that job. If I look at Ebony, my sister, basically she was in childcare. She then got a job at a call contact center for a couple months there, and then she was able to land a job in technology sales because she was doing sort of what the technology sales role, the sales development representative title is on a day-to-day basis. But I think call contact centers are quite easy to get into because you're just taking calls. But then to pivot into technology sales that way, that's a really great way to do that. And then I think the other thing too would be, I know a friend that was actually a waitress and helped them get into technology sales. And that company was like that manager had, like, I think if the manager is hiring folks, right, and they've gone through a similar experience and knew that where they started and where they are now, I think people are willing to take a bet on folks. And so again, if you can, for me, what really helped as well is like I did sports that they really loved that. It showed that I was dedicated, had grit, and these characteristics. So if you just apply for like so many roles that are sales development representatives, and every organization is looking for the pipeline of hiring these folks, like I guarantee you'll land one. And when I went through the interview process with it was at least 10 interviews that I went through, you constantly pick up little things that they're looking for. So you can start to learn the vernacular, what they're seeking to hear in an interview. And it is a bit gamified. Like I'm not going to lie that an interview can be gamified if you know what they're looking for. So I think that's another thing as well.
Yeah, I love it. It's like, what do you bring to the role? And so if you do have the experience, or even if you back yourself, why not look at the AE role first? Because you could go into maybe a tier 2 vendor, or you could start in a reseller, which is part of the ecosystem in tech. So it's all, as always, it depends what the context, what skills do you bring? And you could start really anywhere in a career like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just before we move on here, I think, Gabe, is that it's really important to highlight there are many account executive roles in organizations, depending if it's like a startup versus a very large organization. So you could almost be like a special, for your organization, you almost have like all these specialist products. And then it's like, there could be an account executive just selling that pure product in that organization. or is that person looking after one account and they're trying to sell them their 10 products? So it's like, it becomes very nuanced, but to keep it very simplified, there's usually like, yeah, you're going after mid-market, which it can be anywhere from like 50 people in an organization to up to like 5,000 folks. And then it's like going after the big organizations that are like 5,000 employees and larger. And then
Yeah.
really from there, yeah, can be sales manager and then you're managing a team of maybe 6 to 10, or then you become like a director of sales where you're almost managing the sales managers at each territory that are also managing a pod of 6 sales reps, and then it sort of goes up from there.
Yeah, awesome. And just lastly on the slide too, we've got sort of 1, 2, and 3, just by way of example as to potentially where you could start in a tech sales career. And so again, based on your level of experience, perhaps your background, importantly, your skill sets, your potential, and then we can build out what things are required for each role, what they even mean, which we'll share a little bit more on. But again, just an example as to where you could start. Maybe you're coming from a different career, maybe you are a bit younger, whatever the case is. But we're just showing that there's many ways that you could go about it.
Yeah. And I think before we move on here, that bottom layer, what we're sort of showing there, that I think if you are like 25 plus, 28 plus, I actually see a lot of folks start here first, depending on their background of skills. You started more in the channel, which we'll get into, Gabe, as well. But I think this is a really great place to start as well.
Love it. Well, let's go into a bit of a layer deeper and maybe a bit of a different view on the skills side and a simplified version of sort of the career path from SDR AE up the ranks, potentially even similar to your journey and how you found the experience, but importantly, the context of what sort of vendor, what sort of part of tech, and any pro tips that you might have for other people looking to replicate perhaps the success that you've also had.
Yeah, so skills certainly is, I think it's like we were talking last night around selling. What is sales in technology sales? But I think there's two parts to this, that you're almost having to sell internally to your colleagues, your managers, and to the business. And then obviously you're selling externally to the customers that you're trying to sell to. So I think, really important to the skills that you are doing and sort of the day-to-day actions is obviously calling folks, working with your account executive on their accounts that they're trying to sell into, and doing a lot of research. You have ChatGPT now. When I first started, there was no ChatGPT, so it was a lot of LinkedIn stalking, a lot of understanding what the business is currently doing. For example, ANZ Bank, what are the headlines? How can I send emails out to them that are tying their headlines to how our organization can help the business? And I'd say it's a very research heavy job. So when you actually start, it's actually exciting because you start to learn a lot about Australia, the global economics, what's happening, what's impacting organizations. So you get a lot of groundswell of understanding of global, the global industry. But I think tips there is just make sure that you have a plan every single day, because like a day can go quick. And I think it's important to highlight that you have like call blocks, email blocks, follow-up blocks, meet with your account executive at least once a week. And I think there's a balance of like, you are junior and you don't want to annoy the account executive, but it's important to also like be seen as a strategic lever for them. And how can you work with them to be able to reach out to the right folks? And when you book that meeting, you really want to write up a whole big, I guess, like notes of why they're taking the meeting, hand that over to the account executive to ensure that they have a really successful meeting, because the AEs are doing like working on more late stage accounts. They have a lot going on there. They could have anywhere from 10 to 15 meetings a week, and the SDRs don't really have any meetings with customers, so they don't have a lot to prep for. So if you can do that work for the account executive, that goes a long way with that relationship that you're building with them.
Very cool. And OTE stands for what?
Over target earnings.
Yep. And 130K is typically split for an SDR role of somewhere like 60-40, 70-30. So the base, as
That's
you
right.
gave example before, base could be 80K, and then you've got 50K of upside for your commission. Total package is 130 in this example.
Yep. I think one thing to highlight that we haven't even with that package is like the perks. I feel like when I got into technology sales, like I was treated like an adult for once. Like sort of the other roles I had felt like I was still in high school and I was just treated like a baby, or like you were in these like refined walls of like having to take a lunch break at like 12 and be back at like 12:10. Like, and it felt very strict. Whereas technology sales, it's just like, get your shit done, hit your quota, and it's a bit more laid back in that sense. But like we all have a lot of high agency. And I think it's hybrid work. There's a lot of benefits like getting your healthcare potentially paid for, phone bill paid for. So it's like these little perks that really do go a long way in feeling valued in an organization.
Bougie lunches, if you like that, table tennis in the office, like whatever floats your boat. There's all sorts of perks.
But to wrap this up in terms of commercial AE and enterprise account executive, I then did start as like a commercial AE. I was actually the first account executive for my organization in Australia, looking after Australia, like Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, etc. So I had a pretty unique start as an account executive because I actually got to look after the whole region and sort of start in a segment. But usually when you do start in an organization, you'll basically be given like certain accounts or a certain territory, and that's what you go after. But essentially with a commercial account executive, that is the first time you're running a sales cycle from end to close. I know in enterprise sales, like our sales cycles can be anywhere from 6 to 9 months. So it's not quick and it takes a lot of time. You have to wait for organizations to have budget to spend. They have to go through their fiscal year. They have to have a business case to be approved and get signed off to pay for that. Now, I'll talk about high level of both these roles are taking the intro meeting to closing the deal, working. You're almost as an AE, you're the quarterback of the deal. And how I like to describe that, because you do have your technical resource, you might have engineers, architects, security folks, legal people, marketing. They're all helping you close this deal, but you're essentially driving all the day-to-day communication with that person, designing the business case, working with your team internally to potentially get these senior folks on with their senior folks, because you don't always get to meet their senior folks, and you to be working with the folks underneath to bring all that to light for the business case. But really, it's important to have like negotiation skills, and you learn that over time. I have to say I've closed 20 like logos or organizations to date, and like every single sales deal can be very different. Um, but I do have to say there is like a pretty big jump from commercial to enterprise AE when you're closing more of those, like can be like 30K to 100K deals. And some organizations, maybe that's only 5 to 10K to an enterprise role. And that is really anywhere from like 500K to tens of millions of deals, of dollar of deals. So that jump can be quite large, because as you go and sell to larger organizations, there's more people to sell to at that organization. So it becomes very political. You have to be very organized. And there's a lot around those two different roles as well. But I think for today, that gives a good sense of what you're actually doing in a day-to-day manner.
Yeah, I love it. And it's a good example too, as to if you do start on SDR, the thing you want to be eyeing off next is the commercial AE. You could spend, 2 to 4, 5 years doing that alone. And then you just typically have different levels of seniority across the sales roles too. And as you described, strategic AE could look in different forms where you might just have one account, one major enterprise, but you're actually yielding like tens of $1 million per year is the extreme example. Or enterprise AE, where you're looking still after the territory and you just need to really close millions of dollars on behalf of the company. So different ways to look at it.
Yeah, great point, Gabe. I would say definitely commercial is like 2 to 5 years. And I wouldn't rush going to enterprise. Like that's one big thing. I think obviously you naturally want to get to the next role as well, because like more money, etc. But the skills that you do really learn in commercial are fundamental. Just to be able to understand the sales process, to be able to close deals. And when you get to enterprise, I've seen folks that have actually just stayed there in their career because you earn very good money. You do feel like you own your own business, and you can almost be like you're in quote, like CEO of your territory. And it is very, yeah, like you have 60 months plus there. And I think it's really important to highlight, with earning good money here, you don't have to naturally take that next step to be a manager, because then you're actually managing folks. And if you stay in that role, I think it gives a good lifestyle balance.
Yeah, it's a good point. Awesome. Very cool.
Great.
Lots of ways to do it.
Awesome.
Cool. And then we just have a bit of info on sort of tech sales and the ecosystems where you could start. We're going to break this into the different tiers associated with the vendor, because there's subsectors. How do you even look at what the examples are, who's hiring, like how do you even make sense of the ecosystem when you don't even know But then what's the role of the channel, disty partner, reseller, integrator? There's so many different archetypes of companies where you could land roles. These are bigger names, but don't necessarily need to be them. And then, of course, you've got the customer at the end of the day. So top of the pyramid in the enterprise world, examples given there. But what would you say, Kay, in terms of the overall tech ecosystems map that you wanted to get across here for people that might be new to the industry?
In terms of the tech sales ecosystem map, I would say we want to get to the vendor role. Like, I think we all have different perceptions of, what we do want. Like, I think you can start anywhere, and I think all roles are great, but I think vendors can pay the most, and that's just like facts. Um, but essentially, vendors here, like we say vendor, and what that is like Atlassian, Canva, Go1, AirwellX. We've written those because they're all Australian companies, but you have like the Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, all these organizations. And then that essentially is a vendor that is SaaS, and they are selling software as a service. So that's a vendor, and we work for vendors. Then you also have the channel, which are essentially in Australia. What happens a lot is because the companies are US or UK founded and they've come to this region, they don't have a lot of folks here. And what that means, therefore, that we can distribute the software through our partners to be able to actually go and implement the software. And I think it's important to highlight when software is implemented, that's actually a really strategic, hard thing to do. To also have the change management, the adoption of that technology in that organization. And the partners are able to help the folks learn, educate them around the software, make sure that they're getting value and return on investment with spending with the vendor. So they're really there to support as an ecosystem to be localized because, again, that vendor might not have a lot of folks in region around that. Anything you would add, Gabe, to the channel?
Yeah, I think the ecosystem, wherever you think about it, it's very much understanding the roles of who's doing what. But at the end of the day, when you're looking to get an outcome or you're looking to solve a problem, it usually takes a village. And so even though you're representing as the sales rep, there's a whole ecosystem around you to help to achieve that outcome. And when you can put the customer first and work backwards from that, our market in Australia and the Asia Pac region being very indirect in that sense of working through the channel. But again, as you mentioned, it depends on the go-to-market strategy, the stage of the company. There's so many different nuanced factors around it, but I think this gives a good bird's eye view as to really understanding that operating environment.
Yeah. And just to wrap that up, like if you are a new technology coming to Australia, for example, and, the ANZ banks, CBAs, the Rio Tintos don't know who you are, they're almost going to go to their trusted partner, like a Deloitte, Fujitsu, NTT, and say, hey, have you heard of this technology before? Should we trust it? They're going to look for them for guidance to actually, should we trust and go with this software as well?
Very cool. And then I think the last
Wonderful.
one I'm going to end on is just a little bit of a thought experiment by yours truly, which is if you are thinking about tech sales, of course, we're big proponents think it's a wonderful career path, can really transform your life, increase your income, but it's really about how do you want to take grasp of that? What do you want to do to upskill and get there? And of course, we're here to help.
Yeah, I think that's the end of our discussion. But yeah, please reach out to both of us if you want to explore getting into the industry. I'm more than happy to have conversations with folks around this topic and navigate potentially some connections, relationships who you could speak to as well to be able to navigate this industry and jumping into tech sales.